Well, folks, our next speaker is one of America's most effective spokesmen for pro-life, pro-family, and pro-growth values. For 8 years, he served in President Ronald Reagan's administration as Undersecretary of Education and as Chief Domestic Policy Advisor. In 1988, he became president of the Family Research Council and a senior vice president focused on the family. And then in 2000, he ran for president of the United States. He has continued to champion causes that are important to all of us, values voters, at American Values, a nonprofit educational organization, and the Campaign for Working Families, a political action committee dedicated to electing pro-family, pro-life conservatives to public office. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome back one of our favorites, Gary Bauer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great crowd, fantastic crowd. What a day it's been. The president, fantastic this morning. I know that was an encouragement to you as much as it was to me. Steve Scalise, I mean, absolutely incredible. You know, there was a reference to this. Steve Scalise is too good of a man to dwell on it. We shouldn't forget who the shooter was. I mean, this was a left-wing radical. This wasn't a guy down and out and having some bad times. This was a guy active in the so-called progressive movement, probably thought of himself as being very tolerant. Spent his time on a website called Terminate the Republican Party. A list was found in his pocket of Steve Scalise's name along with a dozen other conservative Republican congressmen. On that website I referenced, later that same day, within hours of the news bulletin of the shooting, someone went onto the website and put it the following, and it's 1, 2, 3 shots, you're out at the old ball game. And the FBI investigated and said there's no evidence that this had anything to do with an ideological or political agenda. You know, Winston Churchill once said that there's nothing quite as exhilarating as being shot at and missed. Well, Steve Scalise, unfortunately, was hit. And there's nothing more satisfying, if you're Steve Scalise, than to come back from that stronger than ever and to enact the agenda that his shooter hates. You know, as usual, I got about 50 things to talk with you about, and I've got about 15 minutes to do it. So I'm going to have to narrow it down here. But I always want to talk about America because that's why we're here. This is what this all is all about. It's not whether a party with an R next to their name or a D next to their name prevails in one election or another. It's about America. And, you know, there are some in America on the right, on the corporate right, that think America's only about profits. And I love profits as much as the next guy, but that's not the main purpose of America. You know, these are the people that are quite happy to build their factory in some other country and pay slave wages if they can improve their profits. That's not the America I want. And then there are people on the left, their idea of America is that this is simply the place of different strokes for different folks. If it feels good, do it. The idea of ordered liberty under God? No, they want nothing to do with that. Neither are of those visions are the vision of America that you believe in. Look, this country is the foundation of Western civilization. It's a civilization that has brought more freedom to more people and more opportunity than any civilization in the history of the world. If, God forbid, something would happen to America, and ladies and gentlemen, you and I know there are people out there, and there are people even in the country that want very bad things to happen to America. If anything bad, severely bad would happen to America, the world would slide into another dark age. There's no question about that. We have a glorious history. and quite frankly, an unexpected history. As has been pointed out a couple of times, we defeated in our very beginning the great empire of the age, Great Britain. Great Britain. Thank you, Uncle Sam. Appreciate that. And our victory was a miracle. A ragtag colonial army beat the British at places like Yorktown and Valley Forge. I think you were there, sir. We went on from that founding into the next century, and in the next century we had to confront the great evil of slavery, a horrendous civil war. 600,000 Americans died before it was over. Abraham Lincoln, just a few miles from where we are right now, gave his second inaugural address, 1 page long. It is an inaugural address by a broken man. He said in that inaugural address that his fear was that a just God would require of America that enough blood be shed north and south until it would equal all the blood drawn by the slave master's lash. Can you imagine today if a public figure suggested that things happening to America was because a just God was bringing his judgment on us? They would be run out of town. The next century, the 20th century, we defeated the Nazis and the Japanese warlords. The greatest generation poured off of the farms and the factories of America and went to Europe and into Asia and liberated those nations from that evil. They came home, they started families, there was an economic boom, there was a baby boom, that's why I'm here, and many of you too. And then under presidents like Truman and Kennedy, Reagan, we won the Cold War, we defeated Soviet communism. And through all of this, we spread our ideas everywhere we went. Freedom of assembly, consent of the governed, the right of free assembly. Every place we went, those ideas followed us. So for over 200 years, this has been the history of this country. How do you explain all those successes? I think there are a lot of reasons, but I'll touch on two that I think are the most important. The first one is that because through all of that, God's hand of protection was on us. This is the God of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, where the founders wrote that important sentence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator." That's the God of the Torah and the New Testament, ladies and gentlemen. It's not the God of the Quran. And the reason I don't hesitate to say that is there are countries all over the world built on the ideas in the Quran. They are not pleasant places for religious minorities, for women, for a whole lot of people. 7 of the top 10 abusers of human rights in the world are Muslim countries. You think that's a coincidence? No, we were built on the God of the Bible, who said that we are made in his image. Now, the second reason we have been so successful is that we have taught each rising generation in our schools and in our places of worship and at home that we are an exceptional nation, that we are a shining city on a hill, that this is a nation worth defending, worth fighting for, that it's decent and good. Are we still doing that today? Ronald Reagan, the president I was honored to work for, gave a farewell address to the country on January 11th, 1989. And even then, he ended that farewell address by bemoaning the erosion of teaching children to love America. I want to read his words to you. Speaking of his own childhood, he said, "We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. And we absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. If you didn't get those things from your family, You got them from the neighborhood, from the father down the street who fought in Korea, or the family who lost someone at Anzio. Or you get a sense of patriotism from school. And if all else failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. Whew. The movies, said Reagan, celebrated democratic values and implicitly reinforced the idea that America was special. But now, he said, some things have changed. So, President Reagan said, we've got to teach history based not on what's in fashion, but what's important. Why the Pilgrims came here, who Jimmy Doolittle was, and what those 30 seconds over Tokyo meant. He said these things in 1989, my friends. I remember when Bill Bennett and I at the Department of Education were bringing up these same issues. It's gotten worse, not better since then. Today, secular elites mock the idea that liberty comes from God. At every level of education, kids are taught not American history, but anti-American history. They're taught that America is evil, that our founders were monsters. And by the way, our last president embraced those ideas. He spent more time apologizing for America than he did promoting American values. He gave more speeches about the wonders of Islamic civilization than he did about the wonders of Judeo-Christian civilization. And was it the president or somebody this morning, I think, said, was it you, Carol? Someone said, when was the last time you recall in one of Obama's speeches hearing the crowd break into chants of USA, USA, USA? I don't recall ever seeing that happen. And all these years of teaching kids that America's evil, it's had an impact. There was a poll just a few weeks ago by The Economist. The worst results in this poll in the history of the country. For Americans under the age of 30, only 20% said they were very patriotic. 35% of people under the age of 30 said they weren't patriotic at all. A significant portion of the left in this country is at war with America. The founding fathers that we admired, they despise. The national anthem that brings a tear to the eyes, particularly of veterans, but to all of us, sends them into spasms. Now, several people have talked this morning about the kneeling controversy we're in. Colin Kaepernick is the poster boy for it. A lot of people in the media have been trying to do cover for him and the others. They've been saying, look, this isn't about despising America or disrespecting America. Yes, it is. Colin Kaepernick was very clear about this when he started his protest. He said, I'm not going to stand for a national anthem of an unjust country. He was very clear about it. And then in the days after those first protests, do you remember this? He came to football practice with running shoes on, that on the shoes were images of pigs portrayed as policemen. And then if you had any doubt about it, a few weeks after that, he came to practice with a T-shirt on with what? George Washington on it? Thomas Jefferson? No, Fidel Castro. I don't know if this guy's read any history, but Castro is on the all-star team of oppression. And this is who he chooses to honor while he's kneeling during our national anthem. Now look, the media, they love him. He's courageous. He's a hero. What would the reaction be if a couple of football players took a knee? And after the game, reporters went up to him and said, so you're joining this anti-police in protest? No, we took a knee in protest of the thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent unborn children that die every year in the name of choice. do you think the media or the NFL would be saying, hey, that's their freedom of speech. They have every right to do that. They're heroes. No way. Absolutely no way. You know, last week, you probably noticed Vice President Pence and his staff were at a football game in Indianapolis between the Colts and the 49ers. We have a son that works for Vice President Pence, and we were proud to watch on TV as the Vice President stood proudly for the national anthem with our son and other people on the staff with their hands over their hearts. And the Vice President looked down on the field and he saw about 24 members of the 49ers who, by their record, apparently decided winning football games is not that important. Losers. And he saw a couple dozen of them kneeling beside the field. And the Vice President shook his head, and the national anthem was over, and he and his staff walked out. And you know all that talk about freedom of speech and heroes and all the rest of it? No, the same media said that was a stunt. The Vice President had pulled a stunt. That's a stunt? But multi-millionaire football players taking a knee on halftime, that's a big noble act. Look, a few weeks before this, Vice President Pence had been standing someplace with his hand over his heart again. He was welcoming home at Dover Air Force Base the bodies of 2 American heroes. Right, real heroes. Army Sergeant Jonathan Michael Hunter, 23 years old, from Columbus, Indiana. Army Specialist Christopher Michael Harris, 25, from Jackson Springs, North Carolina. Both killed by a Taliban suicide bomber. You may not have seen the story. You actually have to look for the story. You don't have to look for the Kaepernick story. Just go to the sports page every Monday morning. There'll be all kinds of columns written about those football heroes. But these 2 guys, their bodies came home to very little acclaim. They didn't do anything special. They just gave their lives. They won't see their daughters walk down the aisle. Their kids graduate from school. They won't see a sunrise in America again. Who are we supposed to shed a tear for? Colin Kaepernick or these 2 heroes? And you know, my friends, the attack isn't just on the football field. We're also seeing the left now turn into an American Taliban declaring war on our monuments. I don't know if you remember this, but it didn't start with Southern memorials. It started with the 10 Commandments. Last couple of decades, we've seen left-wing groups file lawsuits all over America forcing the 10 Commandments, plaques, and monuments to be taken down from courthouses and schools in state after state after state. And a lot of people said, well, you know, separation of church and state, I see their point. Then they went after the Southern monuments, right? Oh, Robert E. Lee, can't tolerate that. So they started changing the names of schools and streets, threw Lee into the grave again. Well, he needs to move over because now here comes Jefferson and Franklin and Washington and, even Abraham Lincoln. Because the people doing this aren't just haters of the South. They're not just haters of Judeo-Christian values. They hate America. That's why they do these things. You know, the Lincoln Memorial has been vandalized multiple times in the last 6 months. The Lincoln Memorial, the great emancipator. I was in Washington in the 60s and 70s. Even in that tumultuous time, I don't remember anybody vandalizing the Lincoln Memorial. Columbus memorials had to be guarded all over America this weekend. Christopher Columbus, not good enough, right? To the left, these are evil men. You know, my friends, when we lose a soldier on a battlefield, we know we should mourn that. A hero's died. That's a tragedy. Every one of those deaths is a tragedy. I'd like to suggest to you, when a decent American child comes out of the American education system, led to believe he or she is living in an evil country, founded by evil men, that's a tragedy too. We've lost an American as surely as we've lost one on a battlefield. A child's been robbed of their heritage. Look, if you have some time this weekend, freed up by not watching NFL football games, take some of that time to sit down with your children and your grandchildren or the neighbor's grandchildren or children, whoever, any young American you talk to. Tell them about who said, "Give me a liberty or give me death," and who said, "I regret I have but one life to give for my country." Tell them who said, "I have a dream." Tell them what Constitution Hall looks like and what good music sounds like. Why there was a Berlin Wall and what the forces and values were that brought that wall down. Tell them about what happened at Concord Bridge and the fields of Antietam and Gettysburg and on the beaches of Normandy, and how their liberty was born and nurtured in those places. And yes, even tell them about Jonathan and David and Ruth and Naomi. In short, tell them how and why they should love the things we love and honor the things we honor. And if you will do that, I am absolutely convinced whatever troubles lie ahead, that this year and 5 years and 100 years from now, the stars and stripes will fly over Washington, D.C., the capital of the freest, greatest nation the world has ever seen. And we will again be a shining city upon a hill. God bless you. Thank you very much. Never give up.